Welcome to another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Dr. Dave Peltz, and along with me is my esteemed colleague, as always, Dr. Joe Hamlett. How are you doing today, Dr. Joe?
I'm doing pretty good, Dr. Dave, and you
Uh,
always count me in like a game show host or something. But okay.
Along with us is another one of our esteemed colleagues is Dr. Aaron Perez. We'll be speaking. We'll have him share some thoughts throughout this episode. For those viewers and listeners that have been on the show before or listened to the show before, thank you for joining us. If this is your first time, we hope you have a good time with this. We are the podcast for personal, professional, and career development. So, with that, Dr. Aaron Perez, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself real quick, and then we'll jump into our topic.
Dr. Dave, Dr. Joe, awesome to be with you all here today. Um, Thank all of you for listening today as well. My name's Aaron Perez, and currently um, live here in Colorado, just outside of Denver. I've been a teacher the last couple of years. I was a principal before that, and done kind of all kinds of things in my educational career. I ran education programs for NASA's education programs in New Mexico, and um, that's kind of where I got my start in education. And so it's about the last 17 years have been really focused in the area of education, and it's not an is the name of the podcast implies. It wasn't an ordinary journey that I embarked upon, but I'm thankful and grateful for uh, in hindsight for the bumps along the way and the curves and the things that really helped shape me, to be the person that I am and the professional that I am today.
That's awesome. And that's a great
Yep.
segue into our
Absolutely.
topic,
Yep.
which is this week's topic is fighting through barriers. And as we were talking offline before we started recording, we're talking about our education journey. And as some of you may know or remember, Joe and I, we started college a little bit later in life. It wasn't, we took the long, scenic, and oftentimes painful route in our journeys. So, and along with that, fighting through these barriers in education, personal barriers, and how do we overcome those? Whether you're listening and you're in high school or, your teachers have tasked you in middle school to listen to something different. I guess that would be different for a middle schooler to listen to this. If you're out on your own or with a family or friends or whatever, wherever you're at in your career, we're hoping that this will bring you some insight on fighting through the barriers that we encounter in our own personal journeys throughout life and education. So, we talk about fighting through barriers. Um, Dr. Aaron, what does that mean to you when you think about fighting through barriers? Some of the barriers that you've encountered and gone through in your educational journey, your life journey, and that sort of thing. What does that mean to you? What does that evoke out of you? Fighting through barriers.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. The initially when you said evoke, I was thinking about some of the kind of emotions that are tied to barriers when they come up, and I think we can. It's easy to look at a barrier and be afraid. I think that's probably the easiest thing to do is look at a barrier and be afraid.
Mm,
Um, and and I, and that's okay as long as the emotions don't stop there, right? Because I think that it's some people they'll get that emotion, they're like, oh my god, I can't, and they shut down.
mm,
For me, I've gone through a lot in my life, and that just the education stuff was just that was the latter part of my life. That was like I was talking about 19 to kind of now. When I was a kid, I was adopted, and I found out when I was about I was an infant. I didn't even know, and I didn't find out until later. And that was really was tragic for me, to be honest. And so, I was at the time I was afraid because there was so many. I had more questions than I had answers. It was, when you learn something like that and you understand what it means, it's traumatic. And so you know, I but the next step is, how do you get through this? And at the time when I was a kid, I didn't know how to get through this.
Mm.
I leaned on my parents, and it wasn't until later that I realized that, you know, I've got some things that are unresolved, and so I really need I think at some point we've getting mentors and getting people that kind of help us through those. Sometimes it's the best thing for us, Dave,
Oh,
and
absolutely.
it was, so I think I'll leave my thought at that. But it's initially the thoughts were, oh my gosh, what is happening? What's going on? But then how do I persist through this? How do I get through this? But it's our the way that our behaviors change towards something, generally will come from an area of we've had experience in this area, and we've also had success in trials and tribulations, right? So, and how do I use those past experiences through
Mm.
in trials to help me in my current trial? And in every trial, I've learned that you're going to learn something new through that process.
Yep.
Yeah.
And somebody else who's kind of been through that, I've always been able to turn to somebody and say, humble myself and say, I need help.
Mm. That's
Aaron,
awesome. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Aaron, you brought up some very key things that will help us overcome those things or fight through those barriers. And the first thing you mentioned was, the attitude that you take toward whatever that barrier is, because like you said, you can, and I've said this, talked about this on previous episodes, whether you can be the victim or the victor. And so, people that choose to say, oh, woe is me, then you won't overcome, or you won't be able to fight through that barrier. But if you are able to say, I'm going to overcome this, and you also touched on reflecting on past experiences, things that you have overcome, the barriers that you did break through, that is also helpful. But then you also talked about having a support system that you
Mhm.
can come back and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, how can you help me or assist me with this? And then the last thing you talked about was having mentors and advisors, people that may have experienced something similar to you, and being able to help you through it. So all those things you talked about are absolutely positive ways to overcome or fight through those barriers. Kind of offline when we were talking, we were just me trying to identify some of these barriers that I didn't see as barriers. And I think that's one way I think I've approached barriers is just not even choosing to see them as barriers, just
Mhm.
immediately saying, okay, that's a road, that's a bump in the road. I'm going to overcome that. So,
Mhm.
but again, I believe it does come with those past experiences that I was able to overcome, that helped me with that mindset, to help me
Mhm.
say, okay, yeah, this is just a small bump, just like those other ones. So
Mhm.
everything you said in your opening statement was spot on. And again, just if people are out there listening to how do you overcome or fight through those barriers, those are excellent tips on how to get started to get you to that next level.
Yeah, and we have several episodes on many of those topics, and I'm gonna kind of bring in a little bit of my education journey. When I started my college journey, I was um, I was in the military for the third time, and um, I had a lot of pushback from my unit. At that time, in the early 2000s, if you wanted to go to college and you were enlisted, you it was not it was not really condoned at that time. if you wanted to get it, you should have got it before you went in the military, was the attitude that they had towards that at the time. And, there's a lot of pushback, and, you know, being a single parent at that time, and, I just remember, how am I going to get through this? There's so much going on in my life right now, personally, and with my job and everything. And, you just, you fight through it, but you fight through those barriers, but you have to be smart about it. You have to be, to me, the way I fought through it was, I was logical and rational about it. If someone came at me emotionally or was attacking me, in an aggressive manner, demeaning me or tell me I couldn't do it, that's what fueled me. And
Yep.
I would
Yep.
always find a way to get over, around, through, whatever that barrier was or whatever that wall was. I always found a way. And I'm going to fast forward into my doctoral program, because I did take 4 years off. I did my undergraduate and master's degree back to back. My master's degree was, I loved it. I was in my groove, like you said, and you just, that's your home stretch. And I'd always, at that point, at the end of my master's program, I was like, well, maybe I will get a doctorate. One of my professors said, you should consider it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm taking a break. I may not do it, but it's a dream that's out there, maybe someday. But hey, I'm good where I'm at right now. And I started thinking about it. And after 4 years, I was like, yeah, I think it's time to go back. And within the first 2 years, I'd lost, I think, 3 or 4 family members, and 3 or 4 other family members had dealt with serious illness. A couple of them didn't make it. A couple of them did, and that's a lot to be thrown at you when you're already overwhelmed with, holy crap, what did I get myself into with this doctoral program thing? And you start seeing your cohort. We had about 30 people in our cohort. Within the first 2 years, it dropped down to about 17. So, I mean, you're seeing all these people fall out of the program for various reasons. And you're thinking, I was thinking to myself, if they can't handle that, how can I handle that? How can I handle my own situation? And it's just to what you said, mentors, your support network, looking past and referring back to old situations that you've gotten through. So, those are paramount things that we get through in our lives, or have gotten through in our lives. Some way, somehow, we fought through those barriers and we wound up where we are here. We didn't let those barriers define us and well, I'm not saying they didn't overwhelm me. I was overwhelmed some of the time, but I did not let them define me or prevent me from reaching or attaining my goal. So, it's a matter of, like Joe said, and you said, it's an attitude. You have to fixate on what you want and how to get there versus in that moment. Because and I've told my son this a few times when he was having some challenges, it's just a blip in the radar. 6 months, having to drive, an hour and a half to work, that's a blip on the radar. I did that for 5.5 years. Joe, you did it more driving in the time that I can't even imagine driving what you did. Oh my gosh. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
it was, that was a barrier in and of itself. I mean, so, all these things that, I might think is a barrier, someone else might think, oh, that's no big deal. And vice versa. Things that I think is no big deal, they might think, holy cow, how'd you do that? So, it's just digging deep within and finding that spot, finding that place to get you through those moments.
Yeah.
When
I think you brought up
Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
go ahead, Aaron. Go ahead.
Dave, when I completed my master's program, I had some. I explained earlier about with what went on with did my showing up for my thesis, didn't go the way that I wanted it to. I was given an ultimatum, to move to another program or disenroll myself.
So basically, they said you could quit or we're going to fire you.
Yeah, that's basically what it was. And I said, well, what are my options? That sort of thing. And it was one of those, I didn't have the right attitude when I got into it. And when I completed my master's, and I was so school was the furthest thing from my mind. You couldn't have taught I could have got a full ride scholarship to any school and I wouldn't have taken it because I was so jaded from that. And I think that we've got to allow when those kinds of things happen, you sometimes we just say, well, I'm going to jump into the next thing, or I'm going to jump into the next thing. And I don't there's nothing wrong with taking that time to reflect, taking the time to self heal, because you get into it's like you know anybody on the call ever been in a bad relationship before? Nobody raised their hands. Nobody raised their hands. Nobody raised their hands. Okay. Um, but the thing is that you want to get into a new relationship, but you want it to be a healthy relationship, right? So you got to take time yourself to heal and to kind of relationships are a lot of work. And so and it's no different because you're spending a lot of time with these people, these professors, and you're studying their work, and you're spending a lot of time with them, especially at the master's and doctorate level. Spending a lot of time with these people, and to invest yourself like that in somebody, and it takes a huge commitment. So I say, take the time to heal, so that when you get into that new relationship, you're not taking all these old toxic behaviors into this new relationship and projecting them on somebody who doesn't deserve you know your toxic negativity. So
I like what you said about taking the time to heal, and I think that's important and very powerful. Joe, um, what did you want to add?
Well, I was going to go back to something you touched on, was perception. When you talked about, for me, the drive was this many miles, but for somebody else that does it for a living, it's no big deal. Or so, yeah, I think part of you being able to fight through certain barriers, it is just the way you look at it, and it kind of goes back to the attitude, how you view it, as compared to how you could view it. And so I think that's very powerful as well. But I also like what Aaron just talked about with the relationship, or taking the time to really heal, or to really take a break. Because we were talking offline, and Aaron talked about, he was at that point where he was like, do I move on? Do I stop this? And I was at that point as well, when I, I'd been going for a period of time, and I was like, you know what, I'm about ready to just, I don't know if I can do this anymore. And it did take, my wife, who supported me all this time, for her to say, I'm not going to let you, quit. I'm not going to let you, give this up. And that's what she said. Just take a quick break, recharge. And that's what happened. After about 60 days, I came back, and then I was ready to, regroup and move forward. And so that absolutely helped me, because I was ready to throw in the towel. I had called my counselor and said, "Hey, I can't do this anymore. I'm ready to walk away from this." And so, with her conversation and them giving me that break, that was definitely the time I needed. Or else I wouldn't be sitting here as Dr. Joe Hamlett, because I would have, let it go and probably regretted it. So I'm really glad I had the support, and then also was able to take that break, to come back stronger, and fight through it, finalize that barrier. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think with the three of us, I'm and I'm not sure if you all had the same conversation inside your heads, but I kind of looked at it as, is the end goal more important than the bump in the road that I'm experiencing right now? Not saying that that bump isn't significant, whether it's losing someone or whatever, job change, you know, getting into a relationship, getting out of one, whatever. But is that end goal that I'm working towards more important than this hiccup that's going to be a couple of weeks, a couple of months, or something like that?
Right.
And not allowing that hiccup or that speed bump to keep dragging me down. I'm gonna cut that rope. I'll revisit it. I'm not saying I'm gonna stop mourning, but I'm not gonna let it take over my goal. I have a goal that I need to reach, and I'm not going to let these things, these barriers, prevent me from attaining my goal, whether it's an individual, a company, a situation, an environment, or whatever, a drive. I mean, so I think it's important to look at things that way too. What is really important? What's driving you? I think you mentioned this, one of you mentioned offline. What's driving you towards that goal, to overcome those barriers?
Yeah, I think that's very important to, as you decide what goal you're trying to achieve, that you define what that success looks like. And I think once you really define that, then that will help you overcome some of these, setbacks or barriers you think you might face. Because like you say, you're still looking at that ultimate goal or that ultimate achievement that's going to continue to fuel you, going to continue to drive you to get there because you've established this is very important to me versus I'll just do it. And Aaron talked about this, when people ask, should I get a doctorate degree or should I further my education? And we
Heck
start asking
yeah,
those
it's
questions.
fun as heck. I get 12 of them.
Right. So you want to you probe them a little bit. You're like, hey, okay, do you know what this is going to entail? The effort, the energy that it's going to take to get there. So that they have a good understanding, a clear understanding of what it's going to take to get there. Because you talked about it. There's a lot of people that start down this path, down this journey, but there's very few that finish it because it's not for the faint of heart. And this is just an example for our education journey, but there are other journeys people take that are just as difficult or challenging. So establishing that end goal or that end state where you're trying to go, and making sure you're committed to it. Of course, things may change over the years, like Aaron said. He took a long break. He's like, I'm gonna pause for a minute, but he came back to it because it was still something he really wanted to achieve. So that's um, again, that's that healthy piece where he took that break because he needed it. So that's again also important that you don't try and do it when you're not in the best state of mind. And like I said, that's where I was when I was ready to just hang it up. And again, I'm glad I didn't, but that's what could happen if you don't take that break, that time to just reevaluate and again reestablish: is this what I want to do? Is it worth all the energy, the effort that I'm throwing out there? So
Was it worth it? Was it worth it, Dr. Aaron?
It was definitely worth it. I offline, I was telling the guys, I said, when my wife was really the one who said, hey, we should get a doctorate. And so 2016, we had a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old. And I was like, well, what about the kids? And just
They can take care of themselves.
yeah, there's something. So it was one of those like I was like, I was sure, okay, I'll look into it. I'll put it on my to-do list. And I
I'll get
I
to it after I
applied.
wash the car and feed the pig and mow the
Got to cut
lawn.
the grass. I got some important stuff going on here, and I'm a busy guy, so it was one of those. And I think sometimes we invent, like we invent reasons why we can't do things. We say, well, I just don't have the time, right? I, and I think that, and I don't think, I know that we prioritize things that are meaningful for us, period. And and so it was one of those. So I said, okay, I'll fill out the application. So I sent the application, and then I get a phone call from it was like Virginia Beach. Like, who? I don't know anybody there. So I'm like, hello, probably wasn't even nice on the phone. And the guy on the other line says, hello, my name is Professor Paul Carr. I'm here at Regent University. And I was like, who? Like, um, you applied to our graduate program, and I wanted our doctorate program, and I wanted to talk to you. So um, I didn't expect the phone call. I didn't expect the phone call from Professor Carr. And so when he called, and we talked about it, um, I don't know if I made my kind of mind, okay, yeah, I think I really want to go through with this. I don't know if I made it at that point, but I do feel like sometimes we have these, even if we've made our minds up about something, it's not like, oh look, there's like a red carpet. I can walk down the red carpet. Are those flowers on the red carpet? Why does it smell so good out here? That's not the way it goes. You get on the red carpet and you're like, oh, this carpet isn't red at all. It's more of like a, an off blue color. Wait, what does that smell? Like it's not just sunshine and roses once you make that decision.
It's
You
computers
got to
overheating
continue to
and
make
the
that.
smell of
You got
stale
to
books in the library.
That's probably what it was, and like it's leftover pizza probably in the refrigerator. So you got to continue to make those decisions every day. It's not about the initiative. It's about making the decision over and over because things are going to come up. Um, and it was in my last semester of college, and I got one of those other unbelievable stories. My college professor at the time didn't believe me either. But I was like 2 weeks in. My grandmother passed away on a Tuesday. My cousin called me, drove down on Wednesday morning. We had stayed there all week. We had the service on Saturday, my grandmother. The following Tuesday, her husband, my grandfather, passed away.
Oh my
I get a
gosh.
phone call from my cousin. So I go to the teachers. I'm like, one week and I'm like, my grandma passed away, and then the next week I'm like, you're not gonna believe this. My grandfather passed away, and they were like, yeah,
Yeah.
right. But you know what I did? I was like, you know what? I'm gonna bring back the obituaries just so they can like. So I walk up to the guy because there was one professor, he was not nice. I put him on his desk and I pointed to him and I just smiled at him. I just smiled at him. And then he looked at me and I was like, so I just picked them up and I walked away and I sat down and everything. Um, but I think that, things are still going to happen. Things are still going to come up. How do we persist through that? Same thing.
Yep.
You keep going.
Yep. We've got about 2 minutes left in the show. Aaron, you've brought up a phenomenal amount of experience to share with our audience. Do you have any parting words in last couple of thoughts maybe that you want to put out there real quick?
Of course, thank you. I appreciate it. I've had it's an honor to be here. Really has been. I love working with you again, Dave.
Yeah,
Not the first time we've worked together. I know it won't be the last. Joe, this is our first time to work together. It's been great getting to know you. Parting words. Yeah, I think I would. The last thought that I really had around there are always going to be barriers. There are always going to be things that are going to come up, and my encouragement would be to not let those things distract you from the goal that you set before you. You may need to put the goal aside for a brief moment, like Joe did, brief, but it's important to get right back on and persist through. So sometimes we think in life it's a straight line. That's not the way it works. Education doesn't work.
I've never seen a straight line at all.
It's more like this, but you have a start point and an end point, and it's about, and you may get there in a different way than you thought you would. But at the end of the day, the important thing is getting there.
Awesome. Yep. Thank you, Aaron. And Joe, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I'll just follow it up. I mean, just touch on what Aaron just said. Creating that or finalizing what your final destination is. I think that helps you get to that final destination. Like Aaron just said, that you may go a Z, you may go a X, you may go backwards. But as long as you go from whatever that point A is to point B, as long as you stay on the path, and he said it at the very beginning, The journey sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get there, but if you could stay focused, disciplined, persistent, you'll get there. And so again, view those things that jump in front of you or just happen to get in front of you. View those as just speed bumps, just something you have to overcome, something that you have to get around. But just stay consistent, and you'll eventually get there.
Yeah. The only thing I'm gonna add to that is something that Aaron just said, and he said it's not one decision that you make. You have to make that decision over and over and over again to stay committed to whatever that goal is. And I think that's very powerful. So with that, we'd like to thank our viewers and listeners for joining us on another episode of the Journeys of Not So Ordinary People podcast, your personal, professional, and career development podcast. We'd like to thank our wonderful guest speaker, Dr. Aaron Perez, for joining us on this episode. And if you liked what you heard, that's awesome. Like and share it. That's what it's here for. If you didn't like it, like and share it, because someone's going to enjoy it. Someone's going to get something out of it somewhere. If we can help just one person, that's the goal. So with that, we'd like you to keep on being your not so ordinary you.